Welcome, my fellow Americans, those who serve in uniform to protect the red, white, and blue, and those who serve in local uniform, sworn to protect the innocent citizens of the Low Country and beyond. This is Radio Free Rocky D at rockyd.com and Hot Air Radio on the Scorpion Radio Group. You, my friends, may in fact be politically incorrect. All you got to do, stand up in front of a crowd, you tell the truth out loud. When you tell the truth out loud, that makes you politically incorrect. Well, you'll be surrounded immediately by the PC Thought Police. They're all around you saying, oh my God, Rockies and giant gorillas and Katie Couric, little fish. Oh my God, he could kill us. I said, you know what? These two stories are dominating the news. And really, only the gorilla wasn't lying about what he was doing. Friends, let me tell you something. I am ashamed of the mainstream media even more today than I was in general before. I mean, I never did trust him much. I used to work at NBC once upon a time, and I can tell you that political correctness reigns over there. Now, they may be a little more conscious about it now than they were years ago, but this whole thing with Katie Couric editing in 8 seconds of dead silence and uncomfortable looks by her panel of guests, it is nothing more than adding agenda and, if you will, dogma into an interview. It's not the way it happened. It's the same thing with the Zimmerman 911 tapes that NBC did once upon a time. Now, I would say that the network media here in the Katie Couric show, or whatever it is, this gun violence so-called documentary was supposed to be, I would say she should be ashamed of herself, but she's not. She's not. These left-wingers think anything they can do, any lie they can tell, by any means to get their way, that is justified. All right? I want you to listen to this. Now, you won't be able to see it, and I'll explain to you, okay? She asks a question about felons and guns to some people from some Virginia Gun Owners Society. She asks them a question, and then listen to what happens afterwards.
Let me ask you another question. If there are no background checks for gun purchasers, how do you prevent felons or terrorists from purchasing a gun?
Now, this part right here, you don't see what's happening. She has inserted 8 seconds of silence that didn't actually exist. This is a videotape of the people waiting for the show to start. You understand? With the, nothing in the background. It's made to make them look uncomfortable. Let me show you how they changed this, okay? Let me show you, and you can hear it. This is an actual audio recording of the same question being asked. And notice that even the question itself was edited. And then here the response comes immediately. These people were not uncomfortable answering the question. It sounded like this in reality.
If there are no background checks, how do you prevent, I know how you all are going to answer this, but I'm asking anyway. If there are no background checks for gun purchasers, how do you prevent felons or terrorists from walking into, say, a licensed gun dealer and purchasing a gun?
Well, one, if you're not in jail, you should still have your basic rights, and you should go buy a gun.
All right, there you go. Fiction versus reality. Liberals think you don't know the difference. So let's bring in someone who knows what this is all about. From Gun Owners of America, it's Mike Hammond. How you doing, Mike?
Hey, Rocky D, how are you?
You are the legal beagle, as we say, of the Gun Owners of America.
Yes, and both terms are correct. I am illegal and I am a dog.
There you go, and that's what we need here, because what Katie Couric did was not only, look, I used to work at NBC, Mike. I mean,
Yeah.
And I saw them do things like this, but not this quite overt. And now when you do things like this these days, in the year 2016 here, you don't get away with it.
Well, speaking of a legal beagle, I might say that if you did this in any other aspect of society, you would go to prison for it. If you basically cut out a quote from the middle of your prospectus that you filed with the SEC, that's a crime. You'd go to prison. If you did the same with respect to your filing to the Federal Election Commission, you'd go to prison. The press seems to be the only people around who have allowed themselves to engage in fraud at the same time as they have exempted themselves from the penalties of fraud.
Yeah, exactly. What she did, and we heard this earlier, friends, She inserted 8 seconds of dead air and uncomfortable looks on people's faces, and I'm hearing now, I don't know what you heard, Mike, but I heard that this was actually just a warm-up thing while they're testing the cameras to, that before the interview even started. And that's what you're actually looking at for 8 seconds.
I assume it is. Basically, she asks, without background checks, how do we ensure that terrorists don't get firearms? And the Virginia Civil Defense League jumped in immediately. They said, just because you have background checks doesn't mean terrorists and felons won't get firearms. And incidentally, you enforce it the same way you enforce any other law. If you break it, you go to prison for a very long time. And that's what they said. What they did, in fact, what Katie Couric did is she inserted 9 seconds of basically dead air, showing the members of the VCDL sitting around looking like they were in consternation over the perspicacity of her wonderful question. Yeah. And it takes a certain amount of arrogance to assume that you could get away with this. But Katie Couric, I mean, she started out as a basically pretty face on TV.
That's all she is.
Moved, and this says something about CBS, to the evening anchor. No one found her credible as an anchor. She was fired from that. Now she has supposedly, quote, after days of throwing blame back and forth, she has taken responsibility for the edit of this documentary. Well, that and nickel will get you nothing, because she's not going to lose any sponsors over this. She's not going to lose any salary over this. She'll probably actually get a promotion as a result of her engaging in what in effect is fraud.
Boy, if I had done what she did at NBC when I worked there years ago, they'd have thrown me out the window of the 18th floor of the merchandise mart at the time. They'd have tossed me out there. I saw some weird things happen at NBC, but nothing this overt. Editing something in to change the story? You know what this reminds me of, Mike?
What?
This reminds me of the same guy at NBC, I might add. This was when they took out 40 seconds of the George Zimmerman 911 call. Remember that?
Yeah, well, they've done it over and over and over again. I mean, this is certainly, if you look at the Trump statement that he, quote, sort of wished that, the bubble had burst because smart investors could take advantage of that. Every network, over and over, and they broadcast the thing like every 10 seconds. Every network deleted the sort of and the context and sort of made it look as though he were in favor of widows and orphans starving. It's done constantly, and it's done like, every hour on the hour by these crummy networks, and they never get called for it.
Well, what they did with these, what was it called, the Virginia Gun Club? I can't remember what they were called.
Virginia Civil Defense League, VCDL.
Yeah, just good old guys that know about gun safety and things like that, and they know the rules.
And are very smart, I might add.
Right.
They know their stuff.
What the director of this whole thing, her name is Sochig, I think her name is, Sochig? Yeah. I can't really say her name, but she said she inserted those 8 or 9 seconds of dead air to let people think about it. Oh my God!
Think about the depth of the question. Well, that involves a certain amount of hubris in and of itself. But now Katie Couric has fessed up, has said she is to blame for the problems with the dead air, and that and a nickel will get you nothing.
Why didn't she say something up front? If I had seen that, because she had to see the end product before it was all put together. Yeah. She had to see that. I would have said right away, you know what? Although I agree with your sentiment, director lady, you can't do that. We're adding something in here to the interview that isn't there and wasn't there. We're making these people say, I'll tell you something. I'm really good at audio editing, Mike. Okay, yeah. I could have you read the New York phone book, or I could have you read the newspaper, the Washington Post, and I could turn it into a verbal suicide note. I've done this as a joke for people in production places and teaching other people. I can do it. I can make it go backwards.
Yeah,
I can have you count 1 to 10 and make it go backwards. I mean,
that makes me feel good. Is this interview going to turn out with me saying I'm in favor of the confiscation of guns?
Well, you just said those words, and I can use those anywhere.
Yeah, you'd just completely cut that out and say GOA is now in favor of confiscating guns.
Exactly. This is what they do. However, if I was to do something like that, or anybody else, including the guy at NBC who did it to Zimmerman, you get caught. Because a person like me, and in the studio at the time, my producer and I both looked and said, you can hear the edit. And on this television thing, I will postulate this. And I don't know if you noticed this, Mike, but this television what was the name of the documentary?
Under the Gun.
Under the Gun.
Documentary?
Right.
Yeah.
Not only that, not only did they insert empty space after the question, they redid the question, which they often do. And she says the question differently, too, than on the audio. And that just shows you the whole thing is just nothing but a cartoon show.
It would be criminal in any other aspect of life.
So, legal beagle-wise, Mike Hammond from the Gun Owners of America is their legal beagle. That's what we call him. What is to be done here? Can these gun owners, can these Virginia gun owners, can they sue Katie Couric? Because I would.
Well, that certainly is interesting, whether they could sue the media. The problem is, I would take it that they're probably not public figures. Therefore, they might not have to prove malice. The question is whether silence is the same as a misstatement, and exactly what editorial judgment goes into editing. I think the important thing at this point is shaming them. They'll get, they have, I think, Cravath, Swain, and Moore as their attorneys in New York City. They'll pay them like $5,000 an hour to defend them, and, good luck with that. But I think the important thing is for people to understand how corrupt this liberal media is.
Well, you said, get into shaming them. They have no shame, Mike. You know this.
But people can realize to a greater extent than they do even now how shameless these people are.
Well, yeah, and Katie Couric knew from the beginning that this was wrong. The very fact that I don't think she's stupid at all, but I think she is a bit ditzy, and she's like a lot of people at the top end of the media business. She's in her own little world. You know what I mean? When she wants a drink of water, she doesn't have to get up and go get it. Somebody brings it to her. That kind of thing. She's in her own little world and doesn't realize how badly people like you and I, people on the outside looking in, think, well, this is nothing but a bunch of hogwash.
Well, I can tell you, when you're in New York City, you're in your own little world in and of itself. The people you talk to, the people you deal with are unrepresentative of most of the country and sort of give you a perverted impression of what's going on. I mean, we all have been defrauded in this way. When Obamacare was being considered, quote, PolitiFact interviewed me, and this is a particularly interesting animal. The liberal press has decided that it will be the arbiter of whether other people are telling the truth. And they interviewed me on an aspect of Obamacare, and I threw a Washington Post article at them, which showed that their premise was completely erroneous, and so they changed the topic of their inquiry in order to avoid saying the gun lobby was right.
Well, I had factcheck.org or whatever call me a couple of times, and they won't even use me. I'll tell you why. Because I said, okay, you guys are fact check. Who's checking you? I mean,
exactly.
Who's checking the fact checkers?
The corrupt, fraudulent, liberal media has decided that it will be the arbiters of whether other people are telling the truth.
Yeah, that's just it. And now we have Katie Couric and her gun documentary with the Virginian Gun Owners Club. I got their name wrong again. But the problem is that she is, and her producer and her director are basically perpetrating a bold-faced lie right there in front of everyone.
In legal terms, it's fraud. But, I mean, let me say this. I think there is a utility going into this upcoming election that more, if another 5 million people understand that what the press is telling them is fraudulent, I think that'll be very helpful. So I think shaming people, although for the press it may seem like a sort of futile exercise, actually does have some utility.
Well, it's like scolding a dog 2 days later. They don't understand. They don't get it. I mean, media people are not as smart as they think they are. Being clever and being smart are two different things, Mike.
Well, being in an echo chamber means never having to say you're sorry. I mean,
I like it. I like it. Write that down. That goes on a bumper sticker. That's right next to Make America Great Again.
I'll give it to you free. I don't hold any intellectual rights to that statement.
That's like Make America Great Again. Yeah,
yeah,
like that.
Exactly.
Well, what do you think is going to happen? Are they going to actually run this documentary with the big bold-faced lie in it?
I hope not. I think that would be very interesting if they went ahead and pulled their way through after A, they confessed that they had engaged in fraud, and B, Katie Couric confessed that it was her fault.
Yeah. It wasn't her. That was their producer's idea. That was their director's idea. You know it. Because if she had brought that up, the producer and director would have went, I don't know.
I suspect she's not as smart enough to come up with that level of fraud.
I think you're right. I think
she certainly is dishonest enough.
Right. Well, I think you're absolutely right. I've known many of these people. I worked at NBC. Remember, I'm not going to say his name, but we had an anchor who went to be a network anchor after a while, who after 2 years coming to NBC and the Merchandise Mart still went the wrong way off the elevator when he got out. Okay?
Yeah.
They're just not in there. I mean, he was a perfect hairdo for sure. But he's been
that's what Couric was. I mean, she was hired to anchor CBS Evening News as sort of a network anchor light. She was specifically hired as the person who was stupider than the other anchors, but would bring a good look to the show.
Well, she's cute.
Guess what? People didn't want to hear that.
She's cute, and that's what it's all about these days. Cuteness. You go to any market this size. I'm in Charleston, South Carolina right now, or around this size. You know who they hire to do the television reporting here and do the street reporting? They're kids. My God, we were watching it the other night. In fact, last night on TV because of the storms and the flooding and things going on around Charleston. And they had a kid out there, and she who will be listened to, my gal says she wanted to pick up the kid and burp him. I mean, you know, he doesn't even shave, and he's out there doing reports, and they mispronounce it. I think what it comes down to is that they're into this whole youth movement following the MTV explosion. I don't get it.
Well, it seems to be a liberalism thing. I mean, they seem to promote their children to their Senate seats, and they seem to promote their children to their Hollywood movie star roles and that sort of thing. If you're a liberal, and you're whining about the 1%, in this horrible the 1%, while being in the 0.1%, and yet they do nothing but try to perpetuate the 0.1% status of their offspring.
All right. Mike Hammond from the Gun Owners of America. Legally speaking, Mike, to end this, is Katie Couric or the producer or the director of that so-called documentary, are they going to be in trouble, yes or no?
No, they should be in trouble. They're not going to be in trouble because Obama's packed the courts with liberals.
There you go. Ignorance breeds liberalism. Hey, there's another one for you, Mike.
Yeah, excellent.
All right. Talk to you soon, Mike. Thanks for talking to us.
Thank you. Thank you, Rocky D.
Mike Hammond from the Gun Owners of America. I used to work at NBC. I think I've said that 3 times in this segment. I've never seen anything like what's going on these days. I haven't seen anything like it. I saw some things that were funny back in the day, people trying to change other people's words, but nothing like you just saw with the Katie Couric documentary. I don't get it. This is Radio Free Rocky D at RockyD.com. And Hot Air Radio on the Scorpion Radio Group.